Welcome, everyone, to Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter with Chris Bornstead and Kyle Torgeson in studio. We have a number of guests on the broadcast today. We have Jason Minier, who's joining us here from the 100 Men Who Care. We'll get to that in just a moment. Kick us off with some weather, Kyle.
The weather. Today's going to be a high of 77 with a low of 54. It's going to be partly cloudy. The rain's coming back. It looks like there's actually going to be scattered thunderstorms next Wednesday. So that's kind of spooky.
Yeah, all this dry, hot weather. And back comes the rain. Chris, you got to love this.
This is super fantastic. I'm seeing rain showers for tomorrow morning during the parade. So I'm really excited about that.
You're really excited about that.
Obviously, you guys never had to deal with the stench of a marching band uniform the next day after.
After the rain?
Yeah, no. It ain't good.
You know, when I was in the military, we headed off on a road march, and the drill sergeant, this was back in basic training, and the drill sergeant made us march probably a good 1.5 miles, 2 miles in pouring down rain, just in our uniforms. And then after we were a few miles down the road, he says, as you can see, it's raining too hard to not be wearing our ponchos. So everybody put your ponchos on. By then we were soaking wet. So I could relate to what a uniform might smell like inside of a wet deal. Yeah, that was kind of
pretty stinky.
Well, anyway, first of all, thanks, Jason, for joining us here on the broadcast to talk about 100 Men Who Care. Your next event is coming up on September 19th, and it's going to be at Mill City Grill.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we're excited about it. You know, really trying to ramp up the excitement level, get, grow membership and whatnot. We'll have lots of great raffle prizes available for folks that attend to be able to win. Mm-hmm. And then obviously you get the benefit of doing some good in the community in the process, meeting some other great like-minded philanthropic type of fellas. And also, the benefit of getting to learn a little bit about some of the local charitable organizations that, some of us might not be as informed on as we could be.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, if you would, pop the, this is the Mill City Grill where the next event will be on September 19th. If you would, pop the website up for 100 Men Who Care. So there's a lot of different ways that people can get involved. The pretty much the standard fare for people who are unfamiliar with this organization. There's 4 meetings a year, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you bring $100, cash or check that's actually transferred directly to the organization that 100 Men vote on. And you have various charities that have been vetted out by members of the organization to make sure that they're valid organizations, and everybody votes and somebody gets a nice paycheck to help further the good that they do for the community.
Yes, that's exactly how it works. The kind of the rundown of how a meeting goes is people would show up to this one at 6 o'clock, kind of sign in, get a beverage if you like, a snack, and then by probably 6:25 or so, we'll try to get into the business and really try to keep it fairly concise. Like you said, we vet the nominations in advance, and anybody who's won in the last 3 events is ineligible for the next one. We want to make sure and spread the wealth.
Sure.
And then so 3 people that were nominated or organizations will get drawn out, and then there'll be about 5 minutes for whoever nominated that organization, and or if they'd like to have some help, say a fair amount of the charities have executive directors and other folks involved with our group who will come up and speak, in the stead of the person who nominated sometimes, depending on the knowledge that person has of. And it's just a 5-minute brief, tell us what your needs are, what you've been doing, are there any questions type of thing, and then move on to the next couple charities, and then we all get the opportunity to vote which of those 3 we'd like to have win. And then, our organization has no bank account. Like you said, there's no overhead. Any slight overhead that might be there is covered by the organizing committee, which is myself and a handful of other fellows. And so your full $100, or if you feel so inclined to donate more, will all go directly to the organization that wins the vote for the night.
Nobody's going to say, "Oh no, you don't," if you come up with more than $100. I can say that's permitted. Well, I'll tell you what, Jason, we have a couple of certificates here on our desk. These are for the Monticello Pizzeria. This is for fire baked pizza. We're going to send you with one of those to take with you for the meeting on the 19th. And for those in our viewing audience, Northwest Digital News does plan to be there that evening live streaming as well. So we'll live stream the event. We hope a lot of people turn out for this.
We appreciate the raffle prize donation. And also, if you don't mind, I'd like to give just a brief thing about the benefits.
Yeah, go ahead.
The things that really drew me to this group is the no overhead aspect, and then also the fact that every meeting you're going to get to learn about other local charities, and there's so many people here doing so many great things. And I thought I was fairly involved with donating and volunteering before, but there's groups that I've got to learn about now that I didn't have a clue what they did. And then also you get to be part of a larger donation in the $8,000 to $12,000 range, say, where you really have the opportunity to see what an impact it, because the charity comes back the next time around and tells us a little bit about what they've done with the money. And so you feel like you're part of a greater impact than if I just go write $100 check to somebody,
Who was your last winner? Do you remember on the top of your head?
The last winner was
it the 1414
It
club?
was the 1414 club.
That
and then
was my
CJAC was
original
prior.
nominee. That's who I nominated every time when I went through the first year of 100 Minute Care. So I'm glad to hear they picked up some money.
Another great cause. And Emergency Support Shelter and CJAC and Community House are all former winners as well. Lots of great organizations.
And that money all stays local.
Exactly. We don't, we basically have to be assured of that in the vetting process before we'll put them.
It's a really good concept of what you guys are doing, because when people are looking at donating, there's, like you said, so many people that you can donate to. So you guys have found a way that everybody can come together, make it a fun event, and the amount of money that you guys give make it so you can do the organization can actually make an impact with that money. So thank you guys for doing that and putting these on. It's really awesome.
Well, thanks for having me on, and appreciate that, Chris.
We look forward to it. We'll see you on the 19th. So appreciate you coming in. If you would, Kyle, pop the website on the screen one more time. We'll just give everybody a recap of the event. So transition it over for us, please. Chris, if you would, recapture the dates real quickly.
I think I might need glasses.
September 19th.
September 19th. Sorry. Starts at, where's the times at?
It says 6 p.m. At Mill City Grill in Longview. That's when the next event kicks off, September 19th, right here.
Yeah.
Okay, right there.
So
okay.
I thought you could see it up there.
No. See, I'm looking at these screens up there, where it's up there, it's little tiny letters.
All right. Well, we have Mr. Hayes. John Hayes has joined us in studio. For those of you that have seen these colorful signs all around town that say John Hayes, well, we got John Hayes in the flesh here with us.
Thank you very
today.
much.
Yeah,
pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So you're running for this district court position. You have a pretty intense, when I say intense, background in the legal field. Explain to people what you've been doing leading up to this point in your life.
Okay. I've been an attorney in Cowlitz County almost 30 years now. My practice over that time period has been about half trial work and half appellate work. I've been to the Washington Supreme Court, I think 22 or 23 times, and I've been in the Court of Appeals. I think I'm up to about 650 cases. In the majority of those cases, I wouldn't say the majority, but a great number of those cases were arguing constitutional issues. So the Constitution has always been one of my 70 or 80 felony trials. And then one of the other areas of my practice is, particularly recently, is I like to go in and get people there taking care of it and proven themselves to be a good citizen.
And put it behind them and move on.
Yeah, it is for most offenses. Some you can't, but most of them we can. And so it's a fun thing to do.
I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah. Didn't have voting rights, gun rights, or both.
Yes.
Is that more common here in this?
I think it's a little bit more common in this community. Voting rights, and I'll put a little plug in it for right now, is very misunderstood. If a person is not in custody and they are not on, we would call it probation, technically it's called community custody with the Department of Corrections, then you are eligible to vote. All you have to do is to go over and register.
So somebody who tells me, well, I have something in my past, blah, 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 but they're sitting on their porch at home and they say, well, I don't have voting rights. You're saying actually they probably do.
If you're not being supervised by the Department of Corrections, then you can go get your voting. You have your voting rights back. We should put it that way. All you've got to do is go over and register and re-register, and you're good to go. Most people don't understand that.
So would you mind walking people through a little of that process when you mentioned about getting gun rights back? Would you mind walking people through exactly how that happens?
Gun rights back, we have, number one, a period of time after your conviction. If you've been convicted of a felony, and once again, there's some felonies that you can't get your gun rights back, but for the majority of them you can. You have to go 5 years after your conviction and not have a new conviction, not have any charges pending, and you can get your gun rights back. On a misdemeanor, it's 3 years, and there's one other exception on misdemeanors. If it's a domestic violence offense, it's 5 years also. But basically, after 5 years, if you've had no problems, and that's from the conviction. Right. That's not from the completion of the judgment and sentence. Then we can get you your firearms rights back. Like I said, it's not hard to do.
If you guys see this
Chris
right here,
Chris wants to say something.
This is my concealed weapons permit that I got yesterday in the mail, and John Hayes helped me out with that.
Yeah, get the gun rights back.
I was absolutely able to get my gun rights back, and that was really, really exciting for me.
He's been bragging about this.
Oh man,
I know he has. It's fun.
But you have to beat John Hayes.
And it's not just getting gun rights back; it's getting convictions vacated. Right. There's a lot of convictions, felony convictions, that if you go the requisite period of time, 10 years for a Class B felony and 5 years for a Class C felony, if you meet some other requirements, then we can get the conviction vacated, which means that you don't have the conviction anymore. The law specifically says you can say that you've never been convicted of that offense. That's a good thing to be able to do, because a felony conviction makes it very difficult for a person to get a good job and to function in this community. And if you've proven yourself that you've changed, then it's a good thing that we have this option for people.
So on a different level, it's kind of similar to a presidential pardon.
It is very similar to a presidential pardon. Some a little different, but it is.
I bet it is.
It is a little bit.
Well, can we take a moment let's talk about the adversarial system that we have here in this country and help people understand what that is? Because you, off air here before the show, you were explaining that a little bit, and it made a lot of sense, gives a lot of clarity. And there have been things that, from a legal standpoint, that I have misunderstood about courts. And just in the brief conversation we had beforehand, help clear some of that up.
Okay, sure I'd love to, and I do a presentation on the adversarial system and the function of the attorney as a judge and a jury in the adversarial system for the Kelso Police.
That's why.
Academy.
I went through the Citizens Academy,
and I've done it also for classes over at LCC and some other groups. But basically, and I'll give you a little bit of the history behind this. I find it interesting. I hope you find it interesting. I always start out by putting up the number 1066 and say, what does this have to do with anything at all? That's the year the Normans invaded England. And they brought with them a concept called trial by combat, or trial by wager of battle. In trial by combat, you've got the two opposing sides, and they go against each other till one of them's killed, and that's how their system works. They took it over to them. The Normans took that with them over to England, and that became the origins of their legal system. And in that system, you had four people involved. You had the plaintiff, of course, who was saying that the defendant did me wrong. The defendant, who was saying, no, I didn't. You had the king, who was making sure that they fought on basically what we would call a level playing field, so that everybody followed the rules. And then God was involved, because God was the ultimate decider, because God would strengthen the arm of he who was in the right. And so that was how they viewed the system. Well, the king got a little tired of presiding over all these trial by combats, and so he appointed a judge. The plaintiffs and the defendants didn't like the idea of the other guy killing me. And so
It seems like a bad consequence.
it's like a bad consequence. Particularly, I joke this way. Particularly if I am a somewhat overweight older landowner, and the landowner next door who's accusing me of something wrong is a big young guy, I don't want to go and clash swords with him. So we come with the idea of a
Wait a minute, though, John. There would be a lot less cases in court. These
yeah, there might well be if we had this.
still going on.
But they came up with the idea of a
just
champion who stood in the place of the plaintiff and the defendant and basically argued their case. And then we came up with the concept of the jury who would make the decision. And so what we do is it eventually morphs into what is our judicial system. And we call it an adversarial system because in it, our judges have a number of jobs to do. And the first one is to preside over trials and to preside over hearings. The second one is to decide preliminary questions of fact in a case, and then decide questions of law. That's what the judge is supposed to do. The judge basically doesn't care who wins because the judge is neutral. The plaintiff's attorney representing the plaintiff has one job. It's the same job that the plaintiff's champion had when we had trial by combat, which was to win within the rules. The defendant's attorney had the same job, which was to do everything they could to win within the rules. Now, the jury is the ultimate decider of fact in our adversarial system. Now, the jury knows that the prosecutor is doing everything that they can to win, and that the defendant is doing everything that they can to win within the rules, and they're the ones that decide the ultimate question. The ultimate question in our criminal justice system is, has the prosecutor proved every element of the crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt? Now, they have this system in England, and that's directly where we get it. They don't have a constitution. I think they're more civilized people than we are, because we come over here, we want our rights explicitly set out. That's what we have in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution. Our adversarial legal system comes from the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. The 5th Amendment particularly talks about you have a right to an attorney. You have a right to effective assistance of counsel. You have a right to cross-examine the other side's witnesses. And you have a number of other rights in a trial. You've got a right to a fair and impartial jury. And so what we end up with is the adversarial system that is enshrined in the Constitution, and it's how our system works. Now, in my career as a defense attorney, I've had a number of times when people have walked up to me and said, how could you represent this terrible person that's accused of having done this? And I got two responses. One is that that's what they're accused of. They haven't been convicted yet. And the other one is because I believe in the Constitution of the United States. I believe in the 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment and the 8th Amendment. And our system doesn't work unless the prosecutor does their job, the defense attorney does their job, the jury does their job, and the judge does their job. So that's kind of the background of our adversarial system, and that's how it works. It's just not criminal, it's also on the civil side also. Both sides duke it out. You've got your neutral judge presiding, and then you've got your jury deciding the ultimate question of fact, realizing that both sides are prejudiced, representing their sides.
So I want you to elaborate on something, and this is with regard to the burden of truth that is placed on both the plaintiff champion and the defendant's champion in this case. And there's what kind of brings this to mind. There was a court situation that I was sitting in several years ago, and I remember the prosecution putting a witness on the stand and asking the witness if a signature on a document belonged to her, and it turns out it didn't. He didn't know the answer to the question that he was asking. And the judge got really ticked and immediately says, counsel, what else do you have in that folder over there that you don't know the origin of? And he was smoked. And so I'm sitting there going, so you explained something that I'm really curious about, like what the prosecution really proceeds with and how the defense proceeds with that, and kind of the angle of the truth that they're both taking. Okay,
let's see if I can answer this question. I want to go back to the concept that in our criminal justice system, everybody is presumed to be innocent. And we should never convict a person unless the prosecutor can prove every element of the crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the bedrock of the concept of due process in both the Fifth and the 14th Amendments. This is basic in our system. So the prosecution's got to prove every element of the crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense has to prove nothing at all. And at the end of the day, if all the jury can say is, I think he might have done it, but they haven't proved it beyond a reasonable doubt, then we have an acquittal. We have a not guilty finding. We don't have an innocent finding. We have a not guilty finding. And we think that that's the best way under our Constitution, and that's why we have our system that way. Now, this puts the prosecutor and the defense attorney in a little bit different positions. The prosecutor has ultimately two rules. At least I condense them down in two rules, but the defense only has one ultimate rule. The prosecutor's two rules are the following. Number one, only charge a person if they believe the person is guilty. Okay, they have an abiding belief that the person is guilty. That's rule number one. Rule number two is the prosecution should never put on evidence unless they believe it to be true. Okay, that's their two rules. The defense attorney's rule is a little bit different, which is never put on evidence unless, don't put on evidence if you know it's false. So defense attorneys many times will have a defendant that says, I didn't do it, and the story might not seem completely credible, but the defendant's got a constitutional right to get up there and testify. And the defense argues from that evidence if that's how it's presented. However, the defense attorney can never put a defendant up if they say, I'm going to lie. They can never put a witness up if they're going to lie. I've had that happen a few times in my career. My client said, hey, I'm going to get up there and lie because nobody's going to believe the truth, or the truth is going to be convicted. And in those cases, consistently, I go in and withdraw. Say, I can't represent this person. And I will not argue from what I know to be a falsehood. But it's a difference between the burden of proof that the prosecution's got to make and the defense has no burden of proof. That's how our system works. Now, you've got the jury in between us. The jury knows that we're prejudiced for our sides. They'll pull apart everything that we say. They look at everything we say with a jaundiced eye, and then they make their decision. That's how our system's supposed to work. That's how it's set up. So I hope that answered your question, kind of.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Did you guys have something you wanted to ask him?
Well, I've seen the presentation twice now, and so no, the reason why I wanted him to speak about this is because I was really impressed when I went through the Citizens Police Academy, and he did you do a very good job of explaining that what each person's job is and what they're supposed to do, and you do a very good job of explaining the justice system to us, and that was something that really got me excited. You're how you sit and you listen to people talk, and sometimes it feels like you're there for 3 hours. It was like 5 minutes with you because I was just eating that information up, and I think everybody else in the room was too. So I was really glad that you were able to come and talk about that today. We do have a question from a guy named Michael, if you're willing to answer it.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's wanting to know, why don't both the prosecutor and the defendant's attorney have to be sworn in?
Because this is actually an excellent question. At the beginning of every jury trial, the court reads instructions to that jury. And one of those instructions are, and it's basically what he's saying is, look at that defense attorney and look at that prosecutor. Nothing they say is evidence. Okay? Nothing they say is evidence. Okay? The evidence comes from that witness stand, the witnesses, and the evidence that we present. So don't basically take what they say with a grain of salt. That's why we aren't sworn in. We're not presenting evidence. Okay?
Okay, all right.
The evidence stands on its own. It's not your interpretation of the evidence.
Of the evidence. That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I thought it was a good question too. So.
Okay.
That's a great question. Do you have any situations that happen in court? Because there's all these really interesting things that happen and nuances. So is there either a great court story that you want to share, or maybe some of the commonly misunderstood things about court?
One of the commonly misunderstood things about our justice system is that a person can charge somebody else with a crime, or that the police can charge someone with a crime. And that's not true. only the prosecutor gets to charge people with crimes. Except for misdemeanors, the police can write out tickets, but then it's sent to the prosecutor and they can do what they want with it. But felonies, only prosecutor can charge. And that's where the power really lies within our criminal justice system. I've got some one or two other ones I can give you very quickly.
Sure.
People perceive the criminal justice system as being heavily weighted in favor of defendants. Okay, and it is in movies and on TV, but not in real life.
Right.
Okay. The vast majority of crimes that are charged end up with convictions. 90% of the people charged with crimes end up pleading guilty to that crime or a lesser crime. Not all that many cases go to trial, and of the few that go to trial, prosecution probably wins more than the defense. Not all the time. So that's one of the misconceptions. Another misconception is that if I say I'm crazy, I can get away with anything. Okay. I've represented thousands of people in the criminal justice system. I've had exactly 2 acquittals by reason of insanity. And in both of those cases, the prosecution agreed to it. And in both of those cases, my clients spent the rest of their lives at Western State Hospital and were never released. So that's another kind of a misconception about the criminal justice
I
system.
do have one thing. We have this long-running internet disagreement in our local social media sites, and it has to do with unmarked police cars and pulling people over for traffic stops.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you know anything about that? Right now, the State Patrol, as the RCW reads, are the only people that can use unmarked cars to pull people over, I think was it. But basically, citizens are saying the State Patrol does not have the right to pull people, or like Longview police officers or Kelsville police officers have no right to pull you over while you're driving an unmarked police car. Where the State Patrol is allowed to do that in the cases of, you see where I'm going here with this argument?
I see where you're going with that.
Okay, all right. So this is a long-running argument online, and everybody always is at each other's throat on this one. So which is it? Can they use unmarked cars to pull us over, or can't they?
Okay. There is no prohibition at all. They can use any unmarked car that they want. If you can come up with a good constitutional argument why they can't do so, please come and tell me, because I'd like to use it at some point in time.
Right.
No, they can do that at any point in time.
No,
So hey, a quick follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's
because-
just a fun one I had to throw up there because everybody is always talking about it, and it's nice to get an opinion.
Well, I am aware that people can do a so-called citizen's arrest.
Yes.
And in that case, they would not have any kind of markings on their car whatsoever.
Right.
So how does a citizen's arrest work?
Citizen's arrest works is if a crime is committed in your presence, you can make a citizen's arrest. However, you are taking a great risk, because when a police officer makes an arrest and it ends up that the person actually didn't do it, the police officer's got immunity, just so they were acting in good faith. A citizen who makes an arrest and the person didn't do it has got no immunity at all, and would be subject to a civil suit. And if it's a violent crime, this is why we have the police. And I'm not saying you shouldn't defend yourself, you should, but we don't see it very much.
You might be treading on water you're not prepared to swim in, is what you're saying.
Well, yes, but there's always exceptions to it. I mean,
Sure.
I think people should have the right to defend themselves, and if they're in a situation in which they are facing a death or serious bodily injury to themselves or someone else, they certainly have a right to use deadly force. And we're very, very strong on that in the state of Washington, more than almost any other state in the union. But if you can avoid it, you know. So I would be more inclined, if I saw someone committing a crime and they weren't harming somebody, to call a police officer.
Right.
That's the recommendation.
That's
Right.
in,
I mean,
that's
that's what
in their
most
job
people do.
description.
I
That's
mean,
not my job
right.
description.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Let the proper people do their job.
Yeah, let them do their job.
Well, John, thanks for joining us
Okay.
here on Northwest Digital News. You had a lot of great information to share. Really appreciate you coming out today. And if at any point down the road you want to come join us again, I just wanted to add one little piece. This is I've actually done a fair number of legal shows with a good attorney friend of mine out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we titled a lot of these pieces when we were looking at even in the business realm. And we'd say DIY is a good thing for most things, but in the legal world, DIY equals SOL.
Yes.
And so I had to share that with you. I thought you'd find that too.
Yeah. Well, that's the old axiom that a person who represents themselves has a full for client.
Can I ask one last question? Do you
gotta make it
think
quick.
the citizens are pretty educated on the court systems, or is that something that you would like to see more of? Is citizens being more educated?
We need much more education on the court system.
So
More education on the court
So
system.
Kevin Hunter is saying maybe down the road you could come back. Is that something that maybe we could have you back and talk about and try to do?
I'd love to do so. I'd love to do so. Specifically, if you had some areas that we could concentrate on and say, this is how it works. This is how it doesn't work.
Okay, John, how do people best contact you?
Telephone. Give me a call.
You want to put a number out there for people to contact you?
360-423-3084 is my office number.
423 3084.
Yeah.
423 3084.
3084.
He's also running for district court judge, so we'll throw that page up there too.
Position 3, on
Position
my
3.
website. Yeah, you can find
We'll
me on the
link
website
your
too.
website up there too.
Yes. Yeah.
And send people that way for you.
Okay, great.
423 3084.
That's my office number, yes.
All right, there we go.
Okay.
All right, John, thank you very much
Thank you very
for
much.
joining us.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for
in.
having me here.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
roll that video, Kyle.
Yeah.
One of the foundations of our country is our judicial system. Judges and magistrates are charged with making sure this system operates in accord with the law. Most of us think of the judge as the person who keeps order in a courtroom by occasionally banging a gavel.
Quiet in the courtroom.
But judges play a far more important role. In overseeing legal proceedings, they act like referees, ensuring that the rules are followed. They also issue decisions and hand down sentences. Depending on their position, judges and magistrates might specialize in a particular area, such as family, civil, or criminal law. Sometimes called justices of the peace, magistrates can perform wedding ceremonies and handle cases dealing with traffic violations, misdemeanors, small claims cases, and pretrial hearings. They generally have at least a bachelor's degree. Judges are appointed or elected, and almost always have law degrees and experience in the kind of courtroom they will oversee. Without judges and magistrates, we would probably lose one of our most cherished rights, the right to a fair trial.
All right, so that was John Hayes and talking about the legal system and a little description there, the difference between a judge and a magistrate. In most cases that I'm aware of, they have fairly similar powers, but there are some differences. Well, Commissioner Dennis Weber has joined us here on the broadcast to talk about some things going on in Cowlitz County. First of all, welcome to the broadcast, Dennis.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Good to have you. So share with us a little bit of the, what are some things going on as far as the, some economic updates with regard to Cowlitz County?
So we have noticed an uptick in employment. Along with the rest of the nation, the employment figures are improving. One of the interesting phenomenons, though, is that the jobs that are being created typically are less than the jobs that they've replaced that went away years ago. And I say that because the statistics still indicate that the family median income was about 30% below the state's average here in Cowlitz County, which explains why Walmart's the #1 retailer and we don't have a Costco. It's a matter of incomes and preference. So the task is still ahead of us to bring in employers who are willing to pay better salaries, better wages, because that helps businesses in general, because they can pay for more products that way. In particular, we continue to be very supportive of the efforts of the ports to expand the growth. I know the Port of Longview has a number of pretty ambitious programs to try to improve the infrastructure they need to service new manufacturers and new shipping companies. One of the exciting developments that they are working on is expanding their railroad access. They have a railroad that goes right next to the old Tennant Way landfill and winds its way around. And probably 15, 20 years ago, they built an overpass to give access to the old fiber plant. The railroads go under through that. They want to expand and multiply the number of tracks that go to the port site. That makes the port more marketable to manufacturers who want to come in, need to get the products in and the finished products out, the resources in and the finished products out. And they have had a number of companies that have expressed interests in what they have available. And so that's all very encouraging. They're also rehabilitating some of the berths. As time goes by, the old style of shipping products in and out just doesn't fit. So especially with deeper draft ships as a result of the deepening of the channel. So I know they're working on that. They're in the process of tearing down one of the old grain terminal and preparing that site for something better, because they haven't been using that for years.
One of the things that I was under the impression of and turned out to be completely wrong is I understood that deep channel that goes through the river was maybe only wide enough to allow ships to pass each other. But what I didn't expect to see happen, one day I was down by the river and the ship was coming up the river, and all of a sudden the thing executes an about face right in the middle of the river and from end to end turns right around and then goes a little bit downstream and anchors. And I was like, wow, I never expected to see that happen.
Well, probably the most important worker that ships have is not the skipper. It's not the guy regulating the propeller or any of those kinds of things. It is the guy that knows the bottom of the river. Oh, they can't make that U-turn everywhere.
Correct.
And if you have any familiarity with what's happening to our Cowlitz River, that's also happening in the Columbia River. So those river pilots have to constantly be looking at the pictures and the data that indicate where the shoals are, because that river is constantly changing. But it is deeper, and it makes all the difference in the world.
I want to touch on an issue that actually dates back just a short time ago. We saw a write-up in the paper about it, and you're familiar with these people that showed up over on the steps of the admin building in Kelso and were protesting a trip that you had made back east to talk to some of the other states. And I think the other guys would concur with this. When I heard that you had made the trip back east to go talk to the other states and try to help accelerate some resolution to what's been going on with the port, my first thought was, here's a commissioner showing some leadership. Going back and talking to the other states who are likewise being affected by this, because this isn't just a community thing by any means. The other thing that, and I'll give you a moment to think about what you want to share with the audience in terms of that trip and what you learned back there. I wanted to share with you a trip that I made back east a short time ago. I went to Minnesota, but on the way back, I allowed a couple extra days at the end of the trip, and I went to where the coal mine is in Gillette, traveled throughout that city in the residential areas, went to the cities in which the trains are coming this direction. And one of the things I was surprised that I didn't see one single "we can do better" sign. I didn't see any anti-coal advertising. I didn't see any of that stuff anywhere. So I just, I'm curious. So I see a few people standing here, get out of my car, go visit with them. I say, I'm curious, are there any anti-coal or any sentiment in this community? And they're like, no, we happen to love coal, and we happen to love that those jobs are here. And I'm sitting here thinking, we have this port here and the ability to ship coal from here. And am I incorrect in understanding that what is happening in Millennium Bulk Terminals is actually not stopping American coal from getting overseas? It's just going to other places to be, and all we're doing is losing the jobs here in Cowlitz County by that happening. Is that correct?
This is scary, Kevin. We must be channeling.
We must be channeling.
I had a conversation with a staffer in Senator John Tester's office in Washington, D.C. During that trip. And along with all the other staffers of the congressmen and senators that I visited back there, they were all up on it. They were all very much aware, and I was not introducing anything that they didn't know. But the staffer from Tester's office said, well, the Canadian railroads are just across the border north of here, and all that coal is going out through British Columbia. We'd prefer Americans have those jobs, but the coal's being shipped, which is interesting. It is probably a capacity issue, and it is actually faster to ship through the Columbia River. We're actually a day closer to Asia than the other ports along the way. The only one that might be a little bit closer might be Grace Harbor, but they've got additional transportation challenges.
I remember you and I were discussing, talking about coal one time, and you were talking about how we can actually help the environment better if we do bring our coal through our ports. And can you explain to the viewers real quick why that is and how that makes sense? Because it does make sense.
Sure.
And it was a very good point that you made.
So there's basically two types of coal. One that is called anthracite coal that has a high sulfur content, and of course it's the sulfur when it gets into the atmosphere that turns causes smog and acid rain. And then there's the low sulfur coal, which is the different name for it. The low sulfur coal is what is being mined in Wyoming and Montana, and that's the coal that's being shipped. Those Asian countries are interested in lower sulfur content because they have horrendous air pollution problems, and they're seeking ways to still have a robust economy but address their commitments to the Paris Peace Accords. They've all signed it. The United States isn't part of that, but they certainly have signed it, and they want to make things better. But it seems a little bit hypocritical to expect those countries to reduce their economic prosperity if there are alternatives that will allow them to be prosperous and improve their air. The whole idea is not to misuse coal. I mean, it is a polluting, it can be a dangerous, polluting environment, but we have the techniques to process it. Kevin, when you were in Gillette, did you see clouds of coal dust?
I didn't see any.
Piles of coal dust on the
In fact,
roads?
I had a high-resolution 4K camera, and I shot a picture of the rail right after the train went by, and we shared it here on the show following that trip, and I found no evidence of coal whatsoever.
So the technology in terms of shipment is a lot different in America, especially with the folks in Gillette, and all the way through the processing to where they're shifting it from the rail cars on conveyor belts to the ships. It's done in a slurry where the water controls the dust, and it's a much cleaner process than older technologies, which the last I heard was still being used in Canada. And in fact, if people are concerned about pollution in the North American continent, that's another reason to support Millennium, to get those rails, the transportation done in a cleaner way down here. But
the coal you're referencing, the low sulfur, is that what people are calling clean coal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so
some people, the environmentalists won't admit that there's such a thing as clean coal.
Sure.
It's all all dark.
Yeah.
And
Can we
black.
send you back to Washington D.C. by the way?
But
So one of the interesting things is that yesterday afternoon I got a phone call from a county commissioner in Campbell County, Gillette, Wyoming, apologizing. I was kind of surprised, but he apologized for failing to respond to my invitation to their commission to join me on that trip back east.
Oh, yeah.
The original trip was scheduled to coincide with the National Association of Counties Legislative Conference. So I went back there and spent the first half of the week attending those seminars and learning the latest on a whole host of different issues. In addition to talking to congressional delegations on the Millennium issue, I also spent an entire day with a committee of other Washington County commissioners reviewing the negotiation strategies and concerns of our U.S. State Department and the Department of Interior for the Columbia River Treaty, which is kind of important to us, and the counties all along Washington State that share the Columbia River very much concerned. We don't want to give away the store. We want to make sure there's plenty of water that comes down into Canada, and the Canadians want to raise the price. Well, who pays if the price is too high? It's going to be ratepayers ultimately. There's money does not grow on trees, so we're pretty emphatic in saying, the treaty needs to benefit both sides. Agreements with other countries should be fair to us. Where does that come from?
Right.
Heard that from other folks.
I don't know if I've heard
recently.
that yet or not.
I also had an appointment to deal with a bureaucrat in the Department of Justice that give grants to local law enforcement agencies to help fight crime. We have a narcotics task force that has not been funded because of the sanctuary city rules that we operate under in this state.
So we did see funding cut because of that.
Yeah, it's not cut. They just haven't given us the grant yet.
Okay.
And it's we're pretty frustrated on our commission about that whole thing because we've never passed anything that has declared Cowlitz County a sanctuary.
Right.
And we don't operate as a sanctuary city, but we're in a judicial circuit, federal judicial circuit, where the rules have come down is if you cooperate too much with ICE, you're denying civil rights to those folks who've
when I came and testified to you guys, I think a lot of people missed the mark on that. I was trying to get the wrong information that was listed there to get the right information, because it was, you guys didn't make that decision, and the sheriff didn't make that decision, and that's what I was trying to point out, and then it got turned into something completely different.
So that still hasn't changed. Interestingly, there has been some money that's come through from the feds to the state that have made it to the task force. So we still have the task force, but it's reduced from what it used to be several years ago. So that was another meeting that I had. I also knew that the local public transportation organization, River City Transit, had applications in for replacement buses. Those big buses run like 600,000 miles to 1 million miles on their useful life, and they have to be.
They get old.
They get old, and they have to be recycled, and so the feds make that money available, and it is always helpful to go back and visit with the bureaucrats who actually make the decisions on those grants, and it's absolutely amazing. I've done that in the past, and they said, it's great to talk to people like you who come from the real world. They used that phrase,
right.
And the lady that I talked to mentioned that I shared that one of our bus routes serves a chicken processing plant, trying to help make that an option for the workers to commute by transit. And she got all excited because when she was a little girl, her daddy worked at a chicken processing plant in Mississippi, and it was so you never know where those kind of connections to the real world make a difference in processing grants and so on. An earlier trip when I was on the city council back there was for a federal grant for the computer-assisted system used by our 911, and the city of Longview had put the grant in through the fire department for whatever reason. That's how the law was written. And the city manager and I walked into the office, and the guy sat down and said, well, I was just reading your application. It looks very, very good. It's good to see somebody from the real world. And he reached under this whole stack of documents and pulled ours out from underneath the stack and was sharing with us. And we made our case and said, we're trying to improve 911 response time. And he said, well, I should be making a decision soon, and we'll let you know. But thank you for coming in. It's just it's always good to see people from outside in the real world. We walked down the hall when we left, and we pushed the button on the elevator. And before the elevator door opened, city manager got a phone call from his office saying, "What did you guys do? We just were notified our grant was given."
Wow,
they must have liked you guys.
So. So there's a role for going back, and I think last about a year ago, when the commissioners were reviewing the budget, I did propose, it's really time that we participate in Washington D.C. activities based on that kind of personal experience. I know it makes a bit of a difference. They need to know who we are. It's not an automatic guarantee, and we didn't get that bus grant. That will be coming a little bit later, but. If you don't like what's going on inside the Beltway, we need to get in there and share with them what people want outside, and that's I watch the politics that's going on, and you really see the disconnect. I saw just yesterday the film clips on the president's rally in Bozeman, Montana, definitely outside the Beltway. The tremendous response from the 10,000 people in Montana. I mean, that's
a
huge.
lot of people in Montana.
That is huge, and they were just really pleased with the president, and it was kind of amazing. I've been giving speeches for quite a while, and I was amazed when I was listening to him, and he wasn't referring to notes. He does not use notes.
I watched him. I watched like 15 minutes of that speech last night, and it's almost like we have a completely different guy up there. He was way more confident than what he has been in the past, and just amazing in his speech last night. So,
well, I do know that being in front of a supportive audience.
Yeah.
I mean, it also helps.
He
definitely
was just awesome.
And of course, he's pugnacious enough that if he does have hecklers, he just heckles them right back.
Yeah.
You know?
Did you
As a
see
way to do
the
it.
Senate hearing where they heckled the guy yesterday, and he turned around and he was an auctioneer?
Yes,
and
yes. Kind of talked.
That was the best.
Talked over.
Yeah, he
over
auctioneered right over him, right out the door.
So I wanted to share with you a couple of other things regarding the Millennium site. Millennium did file another lawsuit against the director of the Department of Ecology and her staff, based on the evidence that I think Millennium has been collecting through public records requests of communications between staff on how they've actually manipulated the system. And I think that will come out in the court cases to show that, contrary to their claims, it was all done on science and all that stuff. They were playing games, and that simply is not right. I'm kind of ambivalent about whether we should have a coal export terminal there. I mean, look at that site, and I remember when Reynolds employed over 600 employees there. And Millennium's going to offer 135 or so. Kind of, there's a part of me that says, I'd like to have more jobs, but we don't own the property. Property owners get to decide how to use that property. The government's responsibility is to provide the infrastructure and the appropriate regulations to make it safe for the public. And I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem when the state manipulates and cheats and does the kind of things that I think has been going on, not basing it on the true merits. And so that was interesting news. I was not surprised about that. But the other interesting news was, and it hasn't, you get the scoop. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Seattle sent us a message this week that they are resuming their review of their permits that they suspended last summer when the state pulled the water quality. And one of the things that they are looking at is how to overturn the state's decision.
Interesting.
That is stunning. They do have the ability to do that under certain rules, under certain conditions. And we were involved in the negotiations on mitigations for that through the federal process. Never got that far with the state process, because the draft statement said the impacts were not significant, based on an analysis of the worldwide impact, which was what was demanded by the environmentalists at the scoping hearings way back at the very beginning of the process. And, and the final product called them all significant. And since you didn't offer any mitigation, we get to deny your process.
Right.
So some sleight of hand there. At any rate, I'm very encouraged about the development with the Corps of Engineers. My biggest concern is we get a resolution, because the lawsuits will drag out for years and years and years. And we've got enough poverty in this community. We need the jobs sooner rather than later. That's my motivation. If a quick decision says no to the coal, so be it. Then we can move on to the next proposal to use that land to produce jobs, because the land's not going away. The access to a world-class shipping channel is not going away. We just need to have the investments there to put people to work.
I don't think it's very fair for Millennium either to have to wait this long.
Because it's expensive for them.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, there is a part of a thought process or push in this county, in this community, of just the resistance to change, period? And the reason why I mention that is that it seems like it doesn't matter what the economic opportunity is. Something new comes out on the table and the same crowd of people shows up and says, we don't like this idea.
Yes, and I think we need to be very careful not to minimize or make fun of the folks who are the anti-coal folks. They feel with a passion that this is not the direction to go. We certainly know there can be some problems dealing with coal, and we need to consistently work towards ever improving the environment. What I've found is that if you have somebody living here who came from a coal burning community, there's no way you'll ever convince them that it's not dirty. I remember my mom telling me years and years and years ago on the whole issue of coal. She said, we once lived in a place after we were married where we could not use the clotheslines in the backyard because the coal dust was, ruining the clean laundry. Now, that was in the post-World War II years.
Right.
You could not convince her even today. Before she died, you could not convince her to change your mind. And that is so it's a very real passion that these folks have. And I've noticed that by and large, those advocates are retirees who have lived, who choose to either move here or stay here to live out their retirement because of what they've perceived as a very clean, wonderful quality of life. Okay? I mean, they're not interested in lots of jobs. They like it the way it is, and you can't blame them. This is a great place to live with all the trees and all that stuff. The challenge is that quality of life doesn't come for free. It requires tax expenditures to a great extent, and you got to have a vibrant economy to generate the taxes. If all we are a bedroom community of retirees, it's going to be very difficult to maintain the quality of life that we come to expect in places like Longview and Kelso and Cowlitz County. So
there's a lot of things in here.
We have to have both. We definitely have to have the quality of place, but we have to have a vibrant economy.
Well, so that we don't run out of time, I want to move on to have some discussion about the landfill and what updates are going on there. I was at a Longview City Council meeting at the time that the Longview Council elected to send a letter to the commissioners and ask the commissioners to slow down the process, and they're interested in getting their questions answered and getting more information. And what I have been really disappointed with following that is because after those letters received, and I don't remember the exact dates, but when you receive them, after that letter was sent out, there was an open house at the Expo Center in which there was like 8 or 9 experts around the industry that showed up for that were all Republic related, but guys with very impressive resumes in that business were there to answer questions. And I asked Republic after this open house happened, how many council people from our county showed up to the open house? And the answer was 0. Not one single council person. And I'm going, well, that's not exactly leadership, and that's not exactly looking for information or how you get your questions answered. There's also been, as you're aware, the landfill that's out in Roosevelt, the landfill in Coffin Butte. They're places they could have gone to go and visit. We haven't been to Coffin Butte, but we were to Roosevelt twice. I understand you made the trip there. But one of the things that I wanted to share with you that, again, this is another issue that, in my view, you and Commissioner Morton, I don't think Mortensen has been to Coffin Butte, has he? Are you the
I don't
only
think
one?
so. I think I'm the only one.
Okay.
To my knowledge, I'm the only one that's been there.
But the level of homework that you guys have done on this, again, is just another example of great leadership. And I've been very discouraged that our city council people and our mayors haven't done the same thing, because they easily could have. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on that and where kind of things are with the landfill, because I look at the basic premise of everything that's been done there, and I think the commission should be making the decision to go ahead with negotiations, and so that you at least have, because the vote at this point is not a vote to sign a contract. It's essentially an opportunity to say, let's get everything on the table so we can look at apples to apples. Is that not correct?
I mean, that's true. I mean, there's been no decision to adopt a republic, and we haven't made a decision even to begin negotiations. It is a little bit more complicated than that, as it turns out. Years ago, when we were operating the Tenant Way landfill, when the county was operating the Tenant Way landfill, there was a huge controversy over the need to build a new county jail. You may not be aware, but the original county jail was not the original, but before the current county jail, the jail was on the 3rd floor of the Hall of Justice. And it was a facility that was labor intensive, very expensive to run. And not surprisingly, the inmates figured out that they could plug up the toilets, cause it to overflow onto the judges' chambers. And that happened pretty regularly. So there was a bond issue before the voters that was turned down. But the need was still significant. And they needed to come up with some method, some way to finance a new jail. What they discovered was the state laws require a huge amount of money set aside for post-closure of landfills. And that doesn't happen until the landfill is filled up after 30 years or so, but the money is built up. And so the decision was made, I wonder if we get buy-in from other leaders, we can borrow that money, build the jail. You know, the jail costs are all shared by the users, the agencies that send inmates there, guests, inmates, prisoners, whatever you call them. And so they approached the two cities. They approached the cities and created a governance committee to weigh in on the uses of the money collected at the tipping fees for non-landfill related purposes. So that committee met regularly while the Tenant Way landfill was, and it's only met, I think, once since the Tenant Way landfill was closed. So I remember thinking in my mind, that was a Tenant Way governance committee. Well, the two cities have that committee is set up, signed by an agreement that all the cities agreed to. They said, we will promise to send all of our municipal solid waste to Cowlitz County in exchange for this committee that will share the use of extra funds that you come up with. We didn't go to the cities when we talked about this management change. And in hindsight, that was kind of a mistake on our part. We have this partnership with the cities. We've had a partnership with the cities for years and years and years. And it was like we sent a message, unintended. I mean, I certainly didn't intend to blow them off. But we didn't include them in the deliberations. Why is it we need some kind of management change? We didn't have that discussion. Even though that interlocal agreement says they have a right to weigh in on management concerns that they have, as well as the use of these extra funds. We didn't think that applied in this case because it's a whole new landfill. And you know, as I look back at the complaints that they had, I said, if I'd been on the city council, I'd be pretty ticked at the county ignoring us. And we're, City of Longview is the major municipal solid waste landfill contributor to it, and we didn't talk to them ahead of time. So when you asked about what's the latest development on it, what we've decided to do, and we recognize the tremendous opposition to making a change in the management. I said, we need to back up, and we need to have those conversations and say, look, our goal is to make sure Cowlitz County residents and the industrial producers of waste have low rates. That's the only reason it's worthwhile to have any of this discussion. We got to protect those low rates. We know things are happening that are going to work against our ability to keep those local rates low. So we need to share that information with them and get some buy-in that changes are going to happen. The idea is we don't have to change. Just keep doing what we're doing. That's not really an option. All the companies that have looked at our operation said, how in the world can you continue to operate with such small staff? You're burning them out. And we are massive overtime, a lot of part-time work, and mistakes are bound to happen. And And the reason it's short-staffed is we were thinking about making this management change. And so
Right.
why hire a whole bunch of people if somebody else is going to take over? So we purposely held off. Well, now we're going on to 2 years with the short staffing. So we're making some money, but I think it's because we are short-staffed. And that'll go away when we get back to the right level of staff. We still have some other issues that have to be dealt with. Congestion on Headquarters Road needs to be addressed. We are just flaring the methane, which is highly environmentally irresponsible. We need to be harnessing that in a different way.
We can do better.
And as we talked about up at Silver Lake, we've got to be looking at ways to get more water into Silver Lake instead of
Exactly.
getting it mixed into the leachate. So we've not had those discussions with our partners. So the
this
commission has appointed me to go to the different city councils, and this month we're going to be having those conversations.
So for the people out there that are saying we aren't happy with the process, this is what they're saying and meaning by we're not happy with the process.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
They need to be in on it. Yeah.
Right, because that's something I keep seeing and hearing, because we've done a lot of research on it, and so we get a lot of people that ask us, and you know, that's one of the questions that we're like, well, we don't know. So thank you for answering that one and letting everybody out there know it.
All right.
And I hope you encourage them to get more involved in doing the research, getting the information, and getting their questions answered, because we went through, I don't know if they're doing a better job of it now, but we went through a period of time that I would have actually invited every mayor and every council person from every city in the community and had a conversation with the three of us, and we would have known more about the landfill situation than all of them combined did. And I was just like, that's not leadership to me, and that's not really giving. When you're talking about going out and visiting with these various people, the only way you can have honest conversations with them is if they're actually willing to do the homework as well, and go get the information too. Because then now you think of all the leadership that there is in this county and all the various city councils, etc. And if all of these people are doing their due diligence, you can have some pretty great conversations with those people, and honest conversations.
Well, there was something else that we did, again, unintended consequences. There is a state law that says that counties have sole authority, responsibility on landfill management stream. And then they described a process that we could use when we were considering the sale, lease, or otherwise disposing of landfills. And the commission said, well, we want to be transparent in what we're about to do. And so we published the idea that we're going to use this process, request for qualifications, according to this, because this is what the law allows. And we used the phrase sale. And nobody got past that.
they still haven't got past
and they still haven't got past that. And I said, we shouldn't be using that word, because nobody's interested in selling. This is too valuable of an asset. And they said, but we want to cite the law that is allowing us to use this process. And I got that. I said, but just be prepared. You might have people misunderstand. And boy, I mean, it's still, I can't even convince my next door neighbor that we're not selling it.
Right.
So we have to continue working the issue and having the conversations that we probably should have had about a year ago.
I know that we're getting really close on time, but I saw an article in the newspaper the other day about rails to trails. Is it dead? Is it? I mean, I heard that funding was denied. I know a lot of people in our area are working hard on that. So what happens next with that?
Sure, that is great. The original application was for two segments of the rails. There's the old Columbia Cowlitz Railroad that a lot of us remember from growing up at CCRR. That included the land underneath the rails that was sold to Patriot Rail. That goes from the mills up to what is called Ostrander Junction. It's actually a little ways past that junction. Patriot Rail owns the land underneath that. From there to the landfill and onto the old Green Mountain Mill, that was simply an easement on Weyerhaeuser property. And Weyerhaeuser said, we want the property back. We're not using it as a railroad anymore. Our easement says it's for railroad use. You're not using it as a railroad. We want it back. They own the property. If you believe in property rights, they kind of have a legitimate purpose for doing that. But from Ostrander Junction all the way down to Ocean Beach Highway, which is what they've proposed to abandon, that is still subject to the rail banking process and the negotiations. And apparently, from what I understand, Patriot Rail is coming at the beginning of October to talk about, to actually engage in some negotiations on that. So we're still waiting for the consultants to come in with their report on the possibilities and where we go from here. So I guess the answer is yes to both. Part of it's kind of done, and part of it is still very much alive. I think we're going to be sending a request asking the Surface Transportation Board to delay giving them the right to abandon everything. We want to at least wait until the consultant's report gets done, and find out what other options might be available. But if you believe in private property rights, we got to recognize.
So one last question that has nothing to do with the commission. Have you had an opportunity to try the fire baked pizza over at the Monticello Pizzeria?
I have not. I understand. Every time I drive by,
we're going to make it possible for you to do that, for showing up on the show today. There's a certificate for free pizza. It is fire baked pizza. We went there, did a review of the pizza at the pizzeria. It is exceptionally good.
All right. Great.
So you'll enjoy
Look forward to that
dinner over there. Well, that's going to conclude our show here on Northwest Vision News. Special thanks to all of our guests who showed up on the broadcast today. Jason Meunier from 100 Men Who Care. I got that right.
Yep, you did.
John Hayes, who's running for Position 3, a district court judge. And, of course, Commissioner Dennis Weber from the County Commission. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you to everybody who joined us here on the broadcast. Kevin Hunter, Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgeson. Until next time, take care.
Okay.